Hello and welcome into the Who's On podcast, part of the Saber Podcast Network. It is the Commonwealth Clash week. We hope that you are en route to some Thanksgiving fun, some holiday cheer this week as you get ready for the Commonwealth Clash this weekend between Virginia and Virginia Tech. Always this game brings just a little bit extra. There's always something on the line, whether it was last year, both teams trying to go to a bowl game, or now this year, Virginia, one win away from a 10-win season, and, a spot in Charlotte for the ACC championship game. So we're going to preview, obviously, the Commonwealth Clash here today. I've got Andy Bitter from Tech Sideline joining me from a little bit. We recorded on Monday, though, so I knew this was going to happen. Left a little precaution out there to kind of update once we had some little bit more updates from the weekly press conference on Tuesday with Tony Elliott. We talked to Tony Elliott on Tuesday, and obviously the big update that everyone knows about at this point, all over social media, all over our Saber message board, Kam Robinson is out for the remainder of the season with an ACL injury. He will have surgery upcoming here, but they will be without Kam Robinson. And there was some hope, I guess, coming off of the after the Duke game, because he did come back and try to give it a go there. Tony Elliott said after the game that the scans came back clear, the X-rays came back clear. So there's a little bit of hope that, okay, maybe we kind of avoided something. It looked really bad on the replay when he got rolled up on there on the first drive of the game for the UVA defense. And you're kind of wondering all week, because a lot of people are like, oh, it's so quiet. Well, it's usually quiet during a bye week, even if it's, a bad injury or not a bad injury. Turns out it's pretty much as bad as it can get. It is an ACL injury. Didn't specify how bad of an ACL injury, but he will have to have the surgery. Best wishes in his recovery coming back from that. I still kind of think this, and I talked about it a little bit today with some other people at the press conference, but for my money, Kam Robinson has still been the most impactful defensive player in the ACC this year, and he's also been probably my ACC defensive player of the year, just with the impact that he has made, and also the night and day difference that you saw at the beginning of the season without Kam Robinson, and then with Kam Robinson back in the team, especially when you go back to that NC State game. But some of the stats kind of bear out right now. He is one of only two players in the country with 60 plus tackles, 2 plus sacks, 2 interceptions, and 2 pick sixes. The other player along with Kam Robinson to have those stats is also in the ACC, and Rasheem Biles, the linebacker from Pitt. So those are probably your 2 first team all ACC linebackers right there. And I know, some arguments will be made. Well, Kam Robinson only played 8 games this season. Well, he also ranked 4th in the ACC for tackles per game. So, even though he only had 64 tackles for the season, he was still extremely effective in the times that he was out there. And again, like I said, he's the most impactful defender. And I think that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day is if UVA goes on to beat Virginia Tech, win and get into the ACC title game, and just the way their defense has played the second half of the season, I think that should be rewarded versus maybe a Ruben Bain from Miami, who I think is the other big contender for this. Maybe Rasheem Biles also up there for Pitt. You can knock it for missing a few games here and there, but I mean the games he missed early in the season were non-conference games. Then he misses the majority of that Duke game there. But in the 7 full games that Kam Robinson was out there on the field, you can't deny he was one of the most impactful players out there on the field. So we'll see what that, what the award stuff looks like. Also kind of see what this means for his future as far as what he's considering past this year. But obviously, first and foremost, he's going to get the surgery and recover from that. But it's been a terrific season for Kam Robinson. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. But what does this mean for the UVA defense now going forward? So Maddox Marcellus also came out injured in that game against Duke. He is healthy. Tony Elliott said that, so he will be available to play against Virginia Tech this weekend. But the guy that obviously is going to get the first kind of big amount of reps in Kam Robinson's absence is Landon Danley, who got a bunch of starts at the beginning of the season when Kam Robinson was missing with the collarbone injury for the first 3 games of the season. So Danley now coming back, and I know there was some ups and downs with Landon Danley early in the season, but kind of what I've seen What I saw get with him at Duke, I thought he had a much better game that day. He ended up tied for the team lead in tackles and everything, but I think he was reading the game better, and I think he'll have really benefited from that early season experience going forward. What he brings is just another athletic, kind of good framed linebacker to go out there, line up next to James Jackson, the veteran out there, and then on the money downs, on third downs, as Fisher Kamak would say, the money downs. You'll have Landon Danley out there, probably next to Maddox Marcellus, give you a little bit more athleticism out there when defending on third downs, especially when you have to take into account this week with the running ability of Virginia Tech quarterback Kyron Drones and what he can do as a scrambler out there as well. So I think they'll be okay. And one of the other things I'll make about this UVA defense without Kam Robinson is the fact that the defense around the linebacker positions has greatly improved over the course of the season. This isn't the same defensive line early in the year that was really struggling to get to the quarterback, was struggling making plays in the backfield. This is probably one of the better defensive line units in the ACC right now. I think they're one of the only team in the ACC that has three guys in the top 20 in sacks. You got your Daniel Rickert, Mitchell Melton, and Fisher Kamak now. So they have a really deep defensive line rotation. The interior guys have done really well in the run game. They've had 6 games this year that they have held teams under 100 yards. That's going to be a tall task now against this Virginia Tech rushing attack that we'll talk about later with Andy Bitter. But it's a really strong run game for Virginia Tech, because that's really all they can do. That is their bread and butter. That is everything for them. That's the whole kit and caboodle. I know I'm using a lot of outdated terms here, but I think so. I think the defensive line is greatly improved and is a really strong unit now, one of the better ones in the ACC. And then in the secondary, I think the secondary we have seen the last couple of weeks, especially in that game against Duke, the secondary has gotten so much better. Guys like Jordan Robinson, Emmanuel Carnley, Donovan Platt stepping up to the cornerback positions. Jason Brevard has been one of the best defensive backs in the ACC all season long, really. Out there in the nickel position in the slot. And then Devin Neal, Ethan Minter, Antonio Clary, Christian Charles, all that kind of rotation back there at safety has looked really good as well. I think they're more on the same page. I talked about that last week with the ball hawk when he came on the podcast, kind of looking back at that game. So I think overall this unit has continued to improve around the linebackers. So I think they're in a much better position. And also, I think the Tech game maybe not as much of the worry with missing Kam Robinson at this point. Maybe it's looking forward. I still think they're going to need a really good showing from the linebackers, especially as I mentioned earlier with the run game for Virginia Tech and how dynamic they've been there with Marcellus Hawkins and Kyron Drones, like I talk about later with Andy Bitter. But I think it's an injury that they can overcome. They can still win. I wouldn't count them out without Kam Robinson out there on the field, although it is a huge loss for this team. A couple other injury updates. Ben York, Kevin Wigginton, backup offensive linemen. They will be back this week. They're back off the injury report. Ben York obviously has been used a bunch this season as that 6th offensive lineman in some of those run-heavy sets they like to do. Jane Thomas, the wide receiver, Noah Vaughn, the backup running back. They will be out this week, still not quite back up to speed. That's pretty much the gist of the injury updates. Not a lot else out of the press conference. All your general rivalry week, Commonwealth Clash talk. Chandler Morris, talked to the team earlier this week about kind of what the rivalry means to him as a guy that's kind of coming into this fresh and, talking about how much it means to people around this Virginia football program associated with the program. So it seems like he's a guy that really gets it. And kind of what he said is there's so much going into this game. Earlier in the week, we ranked what's on the line with Greg Medea. And, you talk about the ACC championship potential. You talk about, Tony Elliott getting his first win against Virginia Tech having won 19 of the last 20 games. And it's kind of, he said in his words, the pressure is a privilege. So that's kind of where he's coming at from this. Last thing here, college football playoff rankings updated on Tuesday night. UVA moves up to number 18, one spot better after sticking at number 19 the last couple weeks. Miami also moved up a spot, so they are getting a little bit closer up there in the rankings as well. They're up to number 12. And then SMU, Pitt, Georgia Tech, number 21, 22, and 23 in that order. So I think this all in all means with five ACC teams ranked at this point, the fact that we're just not going to see the ACC get left out of this thing unless something really crazy happens. Tulane is still the only group of five team that is ranked at this point, now at number 24. So they still look like the best bet at this point to be the group of five representation. But at this point, it just doesn't seem like they're going to get two group of five teams to jump over the ACC with as many ACC teams that are ranked ahead of the group of five at this point. So positive signs there. That's why the ranking kind of matters. UVA is their only hope really is you got to win the ACC championship. So that's the only thing that really matters to them if they want to get into that college football playoff discussion. And so obviously they got to beat Virginia Tech, and then you go to Charlotte and see who you face there. As we talked about before, UVA and SMU, probably the best, easiest routes there. They just got to each win their own games, and that'll be the matchup in Charlotte, but we'll see kind of how that plays out. But for now, let's get into this matchup with one of my favorites covering the Hokies, Andy Bitter, over at Tech Sideline, coming on now to talk about the Hokies. That's coming up next. All right, welcome back into the Who's On podcast. I am joined now by Andy Bitter, senior staff writer and lead football beat writer for Tech Sideline over there in Blacksburg. Another big Commonwealth Clash with some stakes on the line. Andy, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been a hectic time. This week is no different.
I wanted to start there because it's kind of been, I would say, you've been covering Tech for a long time, but one of the more unique seasons, I guess, covering Virginia Tech.
Yeah, it has been strange. Been through a coach firing before, Justin Fuente. That was at the end of the year, though. And there were still 2 games left, but typically,
Yeah,
still at the end of the year. Brent Pry got fired in mid-September. It wasn't even fall yet.
yeah.
It's still warm out at that point. That is a strange time to be firing a football coach. So you have this strange 2-month period here where they've had an interim staff, and now it's even stranger now that they have a hire in place and James Franklin, of all people, that, when Brent Pry was fired, he was the coach of the number 2 team in the country. Would not think that he would become available to become the Virginia Tech coach in the long run, but that's how it played out. So bizarre season all around, as strange of a season as I've covered in my career.
And like the different areas that you've had to cover this year. I mean, obviously you start with, kind of coming into the season, then Pry gets fired. Then you've had this whole board of visitors stuff. Like, are they going to, how much are they going to invest into the program and, kind of how are they going to change that and coaching search? And then ending up with James Franklin is something that I don't think anyone had on their bingo card back when Brent Pry got fired.
Yeah, and really the on-field stuff feels secondary.
Yeah.
Almost all this. I mean, last week it was the Franklin introduction. Franklin gets hired, Franklin introduction, Franklin aftermath, and you get to Friday and you're like, oh right, they're playing Miami this weekend. I mean, we're the Miami. That's
Yeah.
a huge game on the schedule historically, and it was treated as an afterthought. Now, part of that is because they were 17-point underdogs going into that game, but part of it is also because everybody has turned their attention to 2026 and what Franklin can accomplish versus what this now 3-8 team can do on the field this year.
I was going to ask because we dealt kind of with this when Bronco Mendenhall stepped down and Tony Elliott was hired. That was during the bowl season, though, so it's a little bit different as far as having the future coach there in place while having, kind of Bronco was still there, but kind of an interim staff there kind of taking over things. How does that kind of match up? How do they work together, or how do they just kind of stay in their own lanes?
Yeah, I think they stay in their own lanes. It's incredibly awkward. I mean, it has to be. There's probably a number of coaches that will be retained from the staff, but then a bunch that won't. And if you're an interim coach of the staff, you've been with this team all year and, in charge for the last 2 months, and all of a sudden there's this other coach that it's going to be his program soon. it is his program at this point, but it's kind of not because he's not in charge of this team. So that's a strange balance. I think what helps it is that Franklin is just focused on one thing right now, and that's recruiting. You got signing day in a little over a week here. That is his primary and only focus. That's why he's brought staffers in. They're trying to close this recruiting class strong and make something, honestly, out of a Hokies recruiting class that is not ranked very high at this point. So I think it would be more awkward if he was concerned about the on-field stuff. And he's given it lip service and he showed up, but he also doesn't want to overstep his bounds out of respect to the current interim staff right now. So that's the setup, and it's weird, but it's only for one more week.
Yeah, why we still have a signing day in the middle of conference championship week is still beside me, but that's a whole calendar issue that can be talked about at another point. But I know this past weekend it was kind of a big deal because it was kind of the James Franklin recruiting weekend there at Tech. You got a lot of recruits coming in there, and so it seems like it's firmly kind of moved on to like thinking of the future and everything. But just your point. Your thoughts right now just about the James Franklin hire as a whole and kind of, I was making a joke earlier today that like, I did so many media interviews last week with like different radio shows and podcasts and stuff, but I spent most of the time talking about Virginia Tech and James Franklin instead of actually Virginia football and, having a 9-win season and everything. It seems like it has really dominated the national media the past couple weeks.
It has. And again, I go back to, when Brent Pry was fired, it would have been inconceivable that James Franklin would end up the coach here. Is this not even a guy you would have put on your candidate list to start this whole thing? Um, he brings national recognition. This is a splash hire like I've never seen it for Virginia Tech. And, there's a financial commitment behind it like I've never seen at Virginia Tech. And, you can, poke holes in James Franklin's resume and say, oh, he doesn't win the big game and stuff like this. I think if you're a Virginia Tech fan, you go, I'm not concerned about the big game right now. I'm concerned about beating ODU and Marshall and Rutgers and Vanderbilt's good this year, but Vanderbilt is too historically. You put them in that category. Those are the games they've had trouble winning. So worry about the big games and that stuff when they happen later on, but bring this program up to a base level of competency that hasn't been there in close to a decade at this point. Um, the other thing I look at it, I mean, obviously from a UVA perspective, I mean, I've seen the clip of Chris Long and Nate Collins, hearing about the news on that, and that was an honest reaction there. And obviously, Chris Long knows his football stuff, so if that's his honest reaction in that situation, how your quote unquote enemy reacts to a news situation like that, it has to make a lot of Hokies fans feel pretty good that's the reaction they got immediately.
Yeah, I think that was kind of spoke for the whole fan base as far as like looking at the message board. Our message board the last couple weeks has been just James Franklin bullet point after bullet point, people talking about it. And I know it kind of coincided with the UVA bye week, so there wasn't as much on the field stuff to talk about with UVA. Right. It was well timed in that regard. But yeah, I think that Chris Long clip pretty much encapsulates what Virginia fans have been thinking last week is like, and that puts even more on this game now, just as like, all right, well, here's your shot, Tony Elliott. Like, you beat Virginia Tech now, or if you don't beat them now, then you got a whole other thing looming out there with James Franklin coming in next year. And then it's like, all right, well, it's Tony. Are you really going to get off the schneid ever? Like, Virginia's lost 19 to the last 20. Tony Elliott's 0-2 right now. So I think that just it put more emphasis on this game this weekend for Virginia, especially.
Yeah, it feels like, I mean, there's no other reason for there to be pressure on this week. You just look at it in a vacuum and you go, well, they're 11-point favorites. They're playing a 3-8 team with an interim staff. Um, they're coming off an idle week themselves, so they're rested up. They're geared up for this situation. They're playing for a spot in the ACC championship game. Just looking at this on paper, not taking into account any history or anything with the future coaching hires, you go, UVA should win this game handily. There is that history there, though, and I'm sure UVA fans would look at this and like, yeah, everything is going their way this year, and should win this one. But in the back of their mind, I'm sure Virginia Tech has been a tormentor for the last 2 decades. That's got to be in the back of the mind a little bit, and certainly Virginia Tech's coming in with nothing to lose. because they have not been great this year. They're not a good football team by any stretch of the imagination. This has sort of been a one-game season since Brent Pry got fired. How will you do against UVA at the end of the year? Well, we'll see if they gear up for it, but again, they've got to come in with this with nothing to lose because honestly, they're expected to lose this game.
It's not quite that scenario, but I always say if Virginia was 11-0 heading into this game and Virginia Tech was 0-11, that Virginia fans would still be sweating all the way through Thanksgiving dinner just about this game. It's not quite that, but it feels a little bit like that with the 11-point favorite and everything you just mentioned there. But let's look a little bit into this matchup. You talked about Virginia Tech, like they've been viewing this as a one-game season. Like the rest of it, toss it out the window. But I know people will come out and they care about continuing this, especially keeping UVA out of an ACC championship game. Like I think that would be a big deal for them. I kind of view this as it's a mix of a bunch of previous editions, of recent editions of the Commonwealth Clash. So UVA can clinch an ACC championship spot, just like they did in 2019. So it's got a little bit of that vibe, interim coach vibe, like 2021. And there's some other ones mixed in there, but it's a kind of a mix of a bunch of previous editions this year.
Yeah, it's such an odd feeling coming into the game. I mean, you mentioned the interim staff and J.C. Price in 2021, pretty famously on the field there, smoking a cigar after winning that one. The 2019 game was really great. Both teams playing to win the Coastal Division. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised Tech lost that game. I feel like they had that one in hand,
Yeah.
and it slipped away at the end of that one. A completely different feeling from the previous season, 2018, where I thought UVA had everything going in its favor in that game in Blacksburg, and somehow that game got away from them at the end, and losing in overtime when Perkins fumbled. I thought that was the one that was like really missed opportunity by UVA to
Yeah.
to win a game it should have, but. They should be favored. I mean, they are favored heavily in this game, and I questioned UVA a little bit in the middle of the season. I'm going, is this offense? They've hit the swoon. Is Chandler Morris healthy? And then they came out and they just pummeled Duke. I mean, just crushed them in that game. And you go, okay, I think they're back in this whole thing. Duke's a pretty solid team up there in the division. They just manhandled them in that game. Perhaps they got over whatever it was in the middle of the season. They righted the ship. But they have to feel confident coming off that game, coming off the rest of an open week. I feel like the energy is going to be pretty high in Scott Stadium on Saturday.
It should be. There's no reason for it not to be. We've seen a couple times this year. There's been some good environments out there at Scott Stadium. Attendance is crawling back up. I know it's nothing. They're not having sellouts or anything yet, but it's been a pretty good atmosphere out there. I want to look a little bit more into Virginia Tech though. That's why you're here. The big question is who's going to start at quarterback? Because I guess now that's a question that came into the equation last week.
I don't think there's any question. I think it's Kyron Drones.
Okay.
He's Philip Montgomery's sort of been ride or die with Kyron the entire time. He got nicked up at the end of that game. That's the only reason Pop Watson came in to the Miami game. And he was all right. He threw a deep ball and then ran for a touchdown. Also lost a fumble there under pressure because Miami was in the backfield all day long in that one. But, Drones has taken basically every other snap this season. They have trotted him out there in every game. The passing offense has been bad, but they have still, gone with him because of the running ability, what he brings on the grounds. So, this is his last college start coming up here. I'd be shocked if they did anything to change it. Interim staff here, they're not going to be here next year.
Yeah.
They're not worried about giving Pop a look in the future or something like that. They're worried about, putting the best guy out there on the field that can win this game. So I think that's Drones, even with the struggles that he's had this year. You look at how he runs the ball. I would expect him to take most, if not all, of the snaps on Saturday.
Here's the thing. Last time Virginia Tech came to Scott Stadium, Drones had a great day. Pop Watson had a great day against Virginia last year. So either way, both quarterbacks have had some good vibes, good experience against the Cavaliers in the past. I mean, is it a
UVA's
situation?
defense is a little better this year, I think.
It's not even a little. It's night and day to what we saw last year. Do you think there's a situation though? I guess if Drones is struggling early, would they go look at Watson, or is it just kind of ride and die?
I'd be surprised. you know, Montgomery was asked after the Miami game, like, could you see a, Pop Watson package? He's had success against Virginia in the past, and last year happened, and I didn't get the sense from his response that he was all too eager to put something like that in or happy to even field the question about it. So
Yeah.
I'd be surprised. I think it's going to be the Kyron show, and for better or worse, that's what it's going to be.
You mentioned the offense, some woes in the passing game, last in the ACC in passing offense, third in rushing offense, though. They're actually ranked ahead of Virginia by a spot in rushing offense. It seems like they've been able to get some good yards on the ground this year. How would you kind of assess the Hokies offense?
Yeah, it is night and day between rushing offense and passing offense. And they can move the ball very well on the ground. I've been impressed by their run blocking schemes, how they set it up. They've got a host of running backs. I mean, Marcellus Hawkins, Terry and Stewart, sort of a 1-2 punch there all season. And now all of a sudden, Jeffrey Overton, freshman four-star guy that they signed last year, coming off an ACL injury, but is played the last couple weeks here. 7 carries for 69 yards and a touchdown last week, 38-yard score against Miami. He looks fast and he looks capable of going out there and getting a big workload. So that's what it's going to have to be because the passing game has been so awful. And it starts with pass blocking. Drones has not been great. Receivers haven't been open. It's just sort of a mess all around when they try to throw the ball. So that makes it a very narrow window of how Virginia Tech can win a game like this. It's got to be running the ball. They got to be ground and pound the whole time. Got to be ahead of the sticks. If they get into a 3rd and 7, like you might as well just punt on 3rd and 7 at that point. They don't really. It's not an offense built to convert those kind of plays. And furthermore, they can't get into a big hole. I mean, if they're down by 2 scores, I think it's over at that point because they're just not built to come back from a deficit like that. Now, if they can play ahead if they can build a lead, work the clock like that, then I think that's a completely different scenario. But don't fall behind in this game because that could be very trouble.
You mentioned the receiving. I guess the receivers not getting a lot of separation. I've liked what I've seen out of Aiden Green at times this year when I've flipped on the Hokies games. It seems like he's a good, like close contested catch kind of guy. He can make some big plays out there like that.
He is, and he doesn't lack for confidence when you talk to him, which is what you want out of a lead receiver like that. They had Donovan Green, the Wake Forest transfer, up until a couple weeks ago, and he left the team. He hadn't had a catch in like 3 weeks anyway, so that was sort of a disappointment that he was not as productive of a player as they'd hoped to be. But Aiden Green, look at the catch he made last week against Miami, where he's sort of sliding toward the sideline and he dragged a foot inbounds as he's doing it. He's made some
Yeah.
real impressive athletic catches out there. The problem is he's sort of been the only guy that does that. I guess Takai Heath a little bit in the slot as well, but they just don't have a lot of weapons in the passing game and have trouble getting to the weapons they do have.
If I remember correctly, I didn't look up the stats, but Green had a good game against Virginia prior to this too. So you talked about the running backs a little bit, Hawkins and Stewart, and then Overton too. I guess how would you describe kind of the running styles between those three guys?
Yeah, I mean Hawkins is more the all-around back. He got a little nicked up at the end of the Miami game. Didn't he had 1 carry in the second half, and I think he hurt his shoulder on a tackle near the sideline. So that might be something to watch this week. Stewart's a 225-pound bowling ball. Had 170 yards against NC State. A really big game there. His usage has kind of gone up and down though, and part of that is because Overton has emerged these last couple weeks, and Overton's the quick, fast guy
No.
out of the group. 180 pounds. Those other guys are up around 220. So you add Drones into the mix, 235-pound quarterback. Drones is 235, Hawkins 215, Stewart 225, whatever he is. That can be a lot of running back to tackle over the course of a day. So again, if they can, stay within arm's length in this game and just run it on the ground over and over, that could be a long day for a defense having to tackle those guys over and over. I could see a path to success for Virginia Tech here, but it is a narrow one.
When you look at, I guess, kind of how Virginia's defense could match up in this one, where's an area you think they could kind of, if they stop this one thing, then is it just the run game? Because Virginia's defense this year, fourth in rush defense in the ACC. They've had 6 games this year where they've held opponents under 100 yards, including that Duke game just a couple 2 weeks ago. So they've been really good against the run, especially later in the season.
Possibly. I mean, Miami was really good against the run. Came in last week, giving up 81.8 yards per game. Virginia Tech ran for 196,
Hmm.
and that included like 31 yards in sack yards. So they were up over 200 on actually running backs and quarterbacks running the ball in the traditional ground game. You go to Florida State the week before, they've been pretty good, hadn't allowed over 100 yards, not against UVA, but against some other teams later in the season. Florida State had been pretty good. Tech was up around up over 100, high 100s, I think, maybe even pushing 200 in that game. I can't remember
Right.
exactly. So they've been able to run the ball. It's just, I think whenever they get behind the sticks, the other team can dial up pressure. And pressure has not been this offensive line's friend for Virginia Tech. And Miami was all over drones immediately after he snapped the ball. It seemed like every time. Whenever it's an obvious passing situation, I think you've seen opponents bring the blitz, overwhelm the offensive line with numbers, and it's not a quarterback in a passing game that can handle that kind of thing. So if UVA has a good blitz package and can time that stuff, I think that's where it can really do some damage against this offense.
They don't blitz a ton. They'll bring it on occasion, and I've been surprised a couple times this year, especially like when they were playing UNC against Gio Lopez. That's a guy that can get rattled when you blitz him, and they didn't really seem to bring the pressure that much on him in that game. So we'll see what they do. They have like a nice third down, speed package that they run out there with Mitchell Melton, Daniel Rickard, Kazim Moore, and Jacob Holmes. That's gotten a lot of pressure this year. I think they're fifth right now in the ACC in sacks, and they do get to the quarterback a lot. They don't always get there in time to bring him down. So it has been a team that can get after the pass rusher. Flipping to the other side of the ball, Virginia Tech's defense, eighth in pass defense, 13th in rush defense. What have you seen from this unit this year?
It's been hit or miss. I mean, there have been some games where they've looked very dominant in the trenches and are disrupting everything in the backfield and not giving up a lot of rushing yards. And then there have been games where they've been run over. And it's been problematic in the secondary, especially lately. They've had a lot of injuries on that back end. The last couple games, they've gotten next to nothing pressure wise. No sacks each of the last two games. Just had one against Louisville the time before that. And, if they're not back there in the quarterback's face, that I don't feel like this is a secondary that's built to last very long in coverage. Gives up some plays down the field. Carson Beck last week was 27 to 32 at one point. It felt like a 7-on-7 drill at times because he just had a clean pocket and a clean uniform and delivered the ball down the field. So in their wins, they have been good about pressuring the quarterback. I think it was 5 sacks against NC State, 4 against Cal in the game they had there. Should have been 5 if it weren't for a bad roughing the passer call on one of those plays. But they have the potential to disrupt. They just haven't done it consistently over the season.
If you can figure out what roughing the passer is at this point, we've seen it too many times this year with weird calls on both sides. Like I just don't know what the refs are seeing out there at this point with roughing the passer.
The
Uh,
body weight's the worst one, where it's like
yeah, yeah,
there's some plays it's like there's nothing the defender can do. Like I understand the one where you pick the guy up and just like slam him into the ground with all your body weight. There's sometimes where that's just how you're going to land.
yeah.
Gravity has a way of landing, so they got to work on the interpretation of that rule, I
Yeah,
think.
tweak that targeting. That's also been always the one everyone loves to talk about. Kamari Copeland seems like one of the better guys on that defensive side. Kind of get some pressure and on the interior.
Yeah, he's part of a trio of tackles. That's the real strength of this defense, I think. Copeland has the potential to go off in the middle like that. A weight room beast, like really strong player. Kelvin Gilliam next to him, sort of a consummate leader on this defense, lunch pail type guy in there. And then Cody Heisman,
Mm.
transfer from North Dakota State. Um, just a big, strong guy. And I think all three of those, it's a good rotation that they have in there, but they're all capable of blowing up a play and making a play in the backfield. I think that's certainly the strength of this defense.
This is the side of the ball I'm most interested in because we talked about earlier Virginia, some of the offensive issues that they had during that kind of like, well, they're winning these games, but it's not great. And then they had the loss against Wake Forest too, where the offense just was kind of sputtering. And the big thing for this offense I've noticed throughout the year is do they get off to a good start? Do they get into that rhythm early in games? Because when they don't, then that's when things kind of sputter. And it's like, they're probably, if they win, it's going to be like 3 points, or they're going to lose a game like they did against Wake Forest, where it was really a punt return touchdown that changed that entire complexion of that game. Um, Offensively for Virginia, what can they do against this Hokies defense?
I mean, I think yards are there for the taking. You look at the last couple games, there was a stretch from the end of the Louisville game through all of Florida State to through the first half, the Miami game. I think it was 15 straight possessions where they got inside the 25-yard line or something like that. No punts in that entire time. Tech just didn't get off the field at all. And there have been times where they've given up a ton of rushing yards. There have been times where they have not looked good in pass defense, and it's kind of a pick your poison deal, I think, for opposing teams. They can beat you a couple of ways. Now I think Tech is probably more vulnerable in the air. I think they have the capability to shut down a rushing offense, maybe less so of a non-traditional rushing offense where, if the quarterback's a statue back there, I think they're better.
Yeah.
That's obviously not Chandler Morris. He's capable of pulling the ball and running, and I think that could give the Hokies a little bit of trouble in this game. But the last couple games, Miami didn't run the ball well, but Florida State did. Florida State didn't pass the ball great. Miami did. So it's just, there have been different types of offenses that have given this defense trouble.
Yeah, Chandler Morris's legs have been a really popular topic of conversation the second half of the season because he's been dealing with a shoulder injury. And so you can kind of tell he doesn't want to take a lot of hits on that. But there are times where he just kind of runs with reckless abandon just to pick up a first down, whether it's in overtime or some key plays that he's made this season. They have a couple, they'll sneak that quarterback draw in there when you're not expecting it, especially in like that 2 minute kind of drill there at the end of the first half. They'll just pull that out there to see if they can get a big gain out that way. And they've done that a couple times this season. So I'd be interested to see if Morris runs a little bit more. He's had the bye week. He was a big question mark going into that Duke game and obviously was able to play. Ran like twice, but he was actually pretty kind of mobile and keeping plays alive. So be interested to see where he is health wise. We're recording this before the Tuesday press conference. I'll put that out there. So any talk about Kam Robinson, the linebacker for Virginia, hopefully I'll have an update prior to Andy's interview just on where Kam Robinson is health wise. But a lot to talk about in this one going into it. But I think we reached prediction time. You mentioned earlier 11-point favorite for Virginia. From what I've seen, that's the largest UVA has ever been a favorite in this game against the Hokies. The previous high was 7 in 2021. And I think we all know how that one ended up, pass to the offensive tackle.
I'm still amazed by that. We were talking about that today in our podcast. Like, just the most atrocious call I've ever seen in a
It
big
doesn't
spot
get
in a game. I
doesn't
mean,
get
and I
much
don't know how
better.
UVA fans probably wouldn't even argue with that. It's just
No.
unconscionable to call that play with the weapons that UVA offense had and the quarterback that they had to throw it out wide to a 300-pound guy and then say, "Hey, run 20 yards to the end zone." I couldn't believe that. I'm still in shock. I was in shock in the stadium when it happened. I'm still in shock.
I have not seen a good defense to it in all the years since that game. I was kind of like one of those like, are y'all sure you knew what you called there? Because there was a situation one year with Robert and I where he called the wrong play against Abilene Christian, which led to like a safety, um, where it was like a triple quarterback wide receiver pass in the end zone, and it's like I don't think you called the right play there, bud.
I mean, that's a nice little second quarter trick play to trot out there, right? Like,
Sure.
oh, let's give him the shot. If you pull it off, you're a legend. Like I think Pitt did that with Tyler O'Neill
Yeah.
years ago, the
Yeah.
tackle, and it's really cool. But you do that in September against a non-conference opponent. You don't do that at the most critical moment of a game against your rival when you're what were they 13 yards from the end zone or
Yeah.
whatever it was. I forget how far they were, and they were going right down the field. It's not like they were struggling to move the ball. That's what sort of made it just so head scratching.
Yeah, when you have an all ACC quarterback and Brendan Armstrong, Jelani Woods, an all ACC tight end, Dontavian Wicks, Keaton Thompson, all the like. But yeah, I don't think fans listening to this want to hear much more about that
No,
play. But your prediction for this game, how do you think it's going to go on Saturday at Scott Stadium?
I mean, even with all the history, I've seen Tech play all year. I know that UVA is going to be keyed up for this game. I think UVA gets it done. I'm probably picking them like 31-16, something like that. I know history is against that kind of prediction, but the Hokies have just not been a good team this year, and they
Yeah.
fight to the end. They're not a team that's going to lay down and stuff like that, but I just don't think they're talented enough to keep up in a game like this, even a rivalry game like this. So I think UVA wins. I think UVA wins comfortably and goes to the ACC title game.
Yeah, I think it kind of plays out maybe a little similar to like kind of how the Miami game went last week for Virginia Tech. Just like they'll make some plays kind of late, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe like, but it was never really like within reach or the realm of possibility that they're going to come back and win that game. Um, I think 11 points is Virginia's had some really crazy high lines this year. They had the Washington State one, which was like 17 or something, and that one ends up being a 2 point game. So I don't love high points, but I will agree with you. I think they might get there in this one. So I'm going something similar, like I don't want to go exactly like 34 to 17, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Virginia Tech has lost. They're 3-8 right now. Seven of those losses have been by double digits. So it's not like they're right there in all these games. And the close one they had was Wake Forest, that they let that one get away from them. And UVA, same situation. UVA and Wake Forest, heck of a season. I picked them last in
Right?
the ACC this year. Mea culpa on that. Jake Dickert, heck of a coaching job. In my mind, it's between him and Tony Elliott for ACC
I
Coach
was
of the
going to say
Year.
it's a toss up between those two guys right now.
But yeah, the Hokies, yeah, like I said, the one thing I'll give credit to Philip Montgomery, the interim coach, this team has fought in every single game. Like there's not been quit in it. Very easily could have been on this season. They could have just packed it in and mailed it in for the rest of the year. You've not seen that uh, over the course of the season or in individual games. They play hard all the way to the end, which is commendable. They just don't have the firepower behind it. And it would not surprise me if this one was a double-digit game.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Obviously, there's a certain amount of voodoo that comes along with this game every year, so we'll see if there's a little bit more Commonwealth magic coming at Scott Stadium on Saturday. Andy, I appreciate it. Hope you enjoy a little bit of a rest this week, maybe in the middle of the week before we get there on Saturday.
I'll try to rest up for the game on Saturday.
There you go. All right, that's Andy Vitter from Tech Sideline. That'll do it for the Who's On podcast this week. We will be with you obviously on Saturday at Scott Stadium for the Commonwealth Clash, where we got the Who's On post-game report immediately following the game. We'll also have coverage at thesaber.com as we always do. You can find the Who's On podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you find your podcast. We will see you next week.